Putin's offensive may be going all out, but it's also going in reverse. Also, we're going to be taking a look at Putin's anti-disinformation efforts and his own efforts to kind of control his own information space. It gets weird. I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's February 14th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first, when we look at the control map, what is noteworthy is that there is exactly one change in actual territory, and it's right here, outside of Chasiv Yar. And let's take a look. There we go. You guys can see that Ukraine has pushed Russian forces back away from this key route into Bakhmut. We've talked about this for a while. This is one of two routes that allow Ukrainian defenders in Bakhmut to receive supply, move munitions in, and wounded soldiers, damaged munitions or damaged equipment out. And keeping this road clear is not essential, right? There's two of them, so it's not absolutely essential, but it's pretty important. But what's really important, I think, is that Ukraine has chosen, after weeks and weeks of conducting a defense in depth or trading space for time, they feel they can now allocate combat power to counteroffensive operations. Now, obviously, this is not a huge counteroffensive, but you guys can see here, it's a few kilometers of territory that they've pushed back. And more importantly, in the entire eastern battlefield, I would say that if you're only going to flip a couple kilometers, this is what you would want to flip. Buy this second road breathing room so it can continue to supply the soldiers defending Bakhmut. And as we've talked about in previous videos, it's a sign that Ukraine feels that it doesn't have to play defensive poker, so to speak, right? It doesn't have to be as ultra conservative with its willingness to deploy troops against Russian forces. You know, when trading space for time is a very, very, very efficient way to engage, to fight a war, in terms of manpower and material, simply because your enemy gets stretched further out, right? Gets drawn to you, and your forces in turn get to draw closer to main areas and also conduct withdrawals in a way that's much more controlled, whereas the enemy may not have. You can almost make their offensive, if done properly, feel like a chaotic stumble forward, where your withdrawal can actually feel like a controlled, disciplined military operation. But it's efficient. It incurs very few casualties, but it involves loss of territory. So the fact that Ukraine feels that it can now flip the switch and deliver limited counterattacks to Russian forces says that they have at least a decent level of confidence that they have blunted Putin's offensive. Now, when we look over at the combat map, you can see just how active Putin has become in its offensive efforts, right? You could see, especially along Crimea linemen, which, as we talked about, I assessed as being the most likely avenue of advance for both political and tactical reasons, that this is where Russian forces appear to be the most active, but we don't see the change in territory that should accompany this level of activity. You can see as well, there's some limited offensive efforts here at Dovorichna, again, where Russia probably trying to get on the western bank of the Oskil to prevent that from being used as a defensive line should their offensive find success somehow. And you can see them also sort of pushing to the south here near Bilohorivka. You have this weird problem, though, that, again, we've talked about. Russian planners just seem to be a little confused about. And that is that swamp in between. Let's find it here. Okay, so just pull this up real quick. Okay, take a look. So you can see here, the attacks are sort of spread on either side of this swampy forested area. You can see here a lot of these small rivers, low-lying marshes. This is just tough territory to operate in. And Putin's forces can't really engage in mutual support, and you can see because of the Seversky Donetsk here. I think it's the Seversky Donetsk. Sorry if I got it wrong again. I've confused these two rivers this entire war. But because of the Seversky Donetsk here, right, Ukrainian forces defending outside of Seversk near Bilohorivka, they are operating independent from the forces defending the Yampil-Kremina line. There's limited mutual support taking place here. Logistically, they may be drawing from like similar forward supply areas that can like cross some of these bridges. But overall, attacking here won't change or affect conditions in the north. And in order for these to become mutually supporting efforts, if that's what the Russians wanted, you would need better weather conditions. You can see this is the worst possible weather condition for this type of offensive. 32 degrees means that you have all the downsides of operating in cold, icy weather, right? You have soldiers who simply burn more calories and operate more poorly in the face of frigid temperatures. You also have the liability that it rains liquid rain often, but then it can freeze, creating a sheet of ice on your equipment and your soldiers. But you also have all the downsides of operating in temperate environments where, as you can see, all this is liquid water in all likelihood. These marshlands are really marshlands. You can't just march over them. They're not frozen snowfields. So this is probably just an awful conditions to try to make an advance in. And for Ukrainians, right, they don't need to make an advance. They simply need to blunt this offensive and punish Russian forces. So it's just it seems like a total disaster. And the Russians seem to have correctly identified that they can't really push hard into this region here. It's just too inaccessible for them. But they also can't attack over open ground because, well, that's also pretty punishing. So This is just really not looking very effective. Now, as always, things can change because, as you know, NATO doctrine, our offensives are combat power forward, right? You bring your max combat power on day one to achieve the decisive effect, right? You break the enemy's lines, and then you create this chaotic environment for the enemy that their command and control can't seem to manage the fight, that their command and control can't track their units, and they can't track your own units. You shatter them, and then you exploit this chaos. It's called the initiative. And the idea is that you get to make the first move in chess, and your opponent always has to try to make moves to react to you, and they never are quite sure what you're doing. Russian just doesn't operate this way. It could be trying to have some sort of ramped up offense where they probe the entirety of the front lines, look for weakness or soft areas, and then concentrate their forces in those softened areas. I don't know. Like I said, I wouldn't write off Russia's ability to marshal men and material for an offensive. But let's talk about what Putin's doing. If he can't win on the battlefield, he can always try to win the information war at home. And our old friend, the Wagner Group, has actually disseminated another video depicting an execution or a likely execution of a deserter, right? Someone who was captured by Ukrainian forces, and then Ukrainian forces posted a video of him expressing pro-Ukrainian sentiments while in captivity. Russian mill bloggers, of course, being the He-Man tough guys that they are, say this brutality is appropriate for a military unit. This is preposterous. As Institute for the Study of War points out, many military justice systems, including the United States, do include death penalties for crimes, particularly in combat. Oftentimes, these exist as like treason level of behavior. But militaries fighting for healthy societies that are themselves professional and well-disciplined do not conduct these sort of extrajudicial executions, and they definitely don't celebrate it. It's considered embarrassing when a military has to punish its own, and a modern professional military takes no joy in seeing that happen, but it's a necessary part of maintaining discipline, even in combat. And oftentimes the reason some of these things include the death penalty is because oftentimes treason results in large scale KIA for your military, right? If someone were to, let's say a Ukrainian soldier was to leak the location of Ukrainian forces marshaling somewhere, they would likely be functionally committing the crime of murder, a multiple murder, by disclosing that information to the enemy deliberately. And so it's not totally at odds with our notion of justice to make that a capital crime. But again, we don't treat this as a propaganda coup. It's considered embarrassing in most civilized society. But here's what's also interesting. Russia's main radio frequency center, Gerchits, a subsidiary of the Russian state media censor, Roscoe. Anyway, they are coming up with something called the Oculus, not affiliated with the Meta company, an automatic system that automatically scans text, images, and video to detect state-censored content, extremist themes, calls for mass illegal activity, self-harm, other types of content which Moscow deems to be a national security threat. That's at least the public face of it. Almost certainly, Belarusian hackers claim that the system actually is programmed to find personal insults directed at Putin, and other sorts of activity that is denigrating to the Russian state. Now, again, this is honestly part of a sad trend in all Western societies, right? The desire to control misinformation, and that means different things in different political entities. In China, misinformation means one thing. In the United States, it means another. But using these powerful automated tools can make stopping misinformation much more effective for state actors. Now, I want to point something out, that this is not necessarily any different than what YouTube does. You may notice, for example, that yesterday's daily update is not online anymore, and that's because YouTube took it down. They age restricted it, and in order to not have it become more of a liability for my channel, I had to remove it. I don't fully understand why, but it's why I have the Patreon, right? The Patreon videos, that's where I do all the viral combat videos, the kind YouTube won't let me show you. And really, it means a lot to me, because the patrons, you guys are ensuring that I can do this regardless of whether YouTube decides my content should be on their platform, right? To at least have a separate space where I can say with confidence that I'll be able to put out my own content without having to worry about complying with what YouTube does or doesn't want on its platform. So these sort of tools, right? These automated ability to remove politically uncomfortable information, sometimes under the guise of disinformation or misinformation. This is common to not all countries, but many, many large countries, and Russia is finally getting with the program somewhat late. But what's also interesting is, to my Russian viewers, I might be banned soon. I might be banning YouTube soon. Sorry, lads. VK is, of course, trying to pull a YouTube and recruit famous Russian language content creators from YouTube over to VK. And expand its music streaming service in order to eliminate Russians' interaction with unwanted content for all those pro-Ukrainian songs on Spotify. The point is, there's no such thing as a small dose of information control in some of these two definitely autocratic societies like Russia, and many of the other political leadership at various levels who are certain that they know what information is best for the public to consume and which information is dangerous for them to view. Anyway, guys, that's all I had. Thanks, as always, to our Colonel tier patron, Thomas McLeod, and our Lieutenant tier patrons. You guys are the ones who really make this whole thing possible. I really appreciate it. Link to all of it's in the description if you want it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.